This is the story of my stepfather, Jon Miles, a Vietnam vet and well-known community activist in Tucson, Arizona, who has fought for the rights of the downtrodden his entire life, even as he battles cancer. His activism could be traced back to his experiences in the Vietnam War, when he was drafted into an artillery unit from Fort Sill, Oklahoma. After Vietnam, his labor organizing led to representing blue-collar workers in the mining industry. It led to meeting Cesar Chavez, the leader of the Farm Workers Union, and it even led to being investigated by the FBI. I am Ramon Bannister. My intent here is to document what made my stepfather into the type of man he is today. But in many ways, this is a journey into my own life and discovering who I am. Previously on the Jon Miles Series, Episode 1. Maybe they fudged the results a little bit.
Well, you know, I think with the draft going on, they wanted cannon fodder, you know, saying you have to report, I think it was 110 South Scott Avenue, Tucson, Arizona, for induction into the United States Army. So, you know, my parents had a going away party for me. I had a girlfriend then too, so then I got drafted, and of course you go up to Phoenix and you raise your right hand and and take that step forward, and I did all that stuff because I wasn't, Vietnam was just starting and just moving on, so it was just kind of like in the back of my mind. Heck, I didn't even know where Vietnam was. So I went, they flew us to, funny, it's left Phoenix, we stayed overnight in the old Adams Hotel, and the whole plane load of us, or going up, it was a bus. We stopped in every small town along the way and picked up people along the way, guys to be drafted. So I made some friends right away, and so when we flew, we didn't know where we were going to go, but we stopped in Tucson on the way back. I don't know why, so I got off the plane and called everybody. Well, I'm not gone yet, I'm here at the airport. So finally we went to Dallas, Texas. And then from Dallas, they put us on a plane and sent us to, where was it? Alexandria, Virginia, or Alexandria, Louisiana. And then from there, they put us on a bus down to Fort Polk, Louisiana. So that's where I did my basic combat training in Louisiana. Of course, I considered I was in pretty good shape, of course. Then all the Army harassment, when you get off the bus, you got some big sergeant there. All right, you recruits, he called us recruits, that, give me some push-ups and this and that, and doing push-ups. We're still in civilian clothes and all that stuff. And the harassment, then reading off names, who was going to be in, I was going to be in Lima Company. So started calling off names. And see, right at that time, the civil rights law had just been enacted. And there were black people and white people. Well, they were going to be in my barracks, my outfit, we were going to have the Arizona guys and California guys, and then upstairs was going to be the Mississippi guys. But what it was all white guys. I mean, I couldn't get over in Mississippi, all these white guys, but then there were black guys that were somewhere else, So because of the racist, they're trying to blend into the Civil Rights Act, that you can't just do it like that, snapping a finger. So I took basic training with all these guys and made good friends in there because, you're all in the same boat together, so you kind of bond, they have that mentality. So the physical part was no problem. There was a lot of running, push-ups, jumping, all kinds of stuff. But see, then marching. And heck, my experience in the Boy Scouts, I mean, I knew how to do all this stuff. So right away, and I was gung-ho, you know, I wasn't going to run to Canada or go to jail to avoid the draft. I was gung-ho. I went, you know, so they made me into a platoon sergeant, to a sergeant or a squad leader. So they gave me some stripes. They put the special thing. So that way I didn't have to do KP or have to do guard duty. I would just have a group of guys I was responsible for. So that worked out pretty good, but pretty soon, I mean, I was still kind of bullheaded. I just some of these sergeants, you know, that they were abusing their authority, in my opinion, you know. And one time, the thing where I finally told them what they could do with their temporary stripes, you know, but we had people on KP and we had a rifle rack in the barracks, and you come in, everybody puts their rifle, and then when you get up in the morning, you leave and you take your rifle with you. But we had a couple of guys that were on KP, so I didn't know about this. So what happened? It was my responsibility to take their rifles to the charge of quarters, the CQ, and they would keep the rifles there because you weren't supposed to leave the rifles unattended in the barracks. So I didn't do that. So they just chewed me out one side up and down. And I figured, I admitted I made a mistake, but this sergeant just wouldn't back off. So this thing was kind of a snap-on thing. As now you get somebody else to be the sergeant. You know, then he kind of didn't know what to say. So then he changed his tune, but I still didn't want to do it anymore. He said, well, you know, you're the only one that has the right to go to the post exchange to buy stuff for people. I said, hell, I don't care. You know, but there were a lot of interesting stories in basic training, and being I was in pretty good shape, I could run pretty good, and I was a hunter. I knew the rifle really well, and it was like a war game. You know, I grew up during the Second World War. Was a kid back then in war heroes, and we used to play war games all the time as kids. You know. So here was a real deal, you know, so to speak, you know, getting trained for it. So I did really well, all the testing and what have you. And so basic training was 8 weeks. So I made some pretty good friends. When the 8 weeks was up, we had a graduation party, or they have for the military, have this big parade. Meanwhile, you really learn how to become pretty good marchers. And they would have us like in order of height. You would march like on the right column, you'd have the tallest people down to the left column when you're marching, maybe 8 in that formation, you'd have that. So height, it was pretty neat when you saw it on film. So we did that and we graduated and we all got our next station where we were going to be stationed, and my next station was going to be Fort Sill, Oklahoma. But I didn't know really where everybody was going to go, you know. So I had a buddy of mine, and I couldn't. It was hard to get a flight out of I forget the name of the town. Shoot, I should know it. I know there was Pickering or Pitkin, but anyway, you'd have to get a ride up to Alexandria and get a bus. And a friend of mine was from Fort Worth, so his parents were coming over. They're going to drive back. So they said, we can take you back to the Dallas airport and you get a plane there. So I said, heck yeah. So I rode with him, and it was like 3/4 of a day drive to go to Dallas. So we got there and they put me on the plane. And meanwhile, the guys that had left, one guy that I knew from Tucson, that he had already arrived. I guess, you know, my girlfriend and my parents, everybody was figuring I was going to be getting back at the certain time when everybody else did, so they all went to the airport. And then, where's John at? So I get in hours later, you know. Here I'm going to be slick, you know, and it's got in hours later. So then there was a flight that left Tucson. So I spent 2 weeks here. Then a flight left Tucson and went, Continental Airlines went directly to Lawton, Oklahoma, where Fort Sill was at. So I went to Fort Sill, and I get there, and lo and behold, here's a couple of guys that I knew from basic training. You know, Dennis Mack was one of them, you know, that, you know, we were friends. You know, we got separated in Vietnam, but we were friends there. So what it was because of the Vietnam War going on, you weren't going to have to go through 8 more weeks of training. It was going to be OJT, on the job training. So they put us in a regular outfit. We had guys that knew what they were doing. And this is where all of a sudden I met a lot of Puerto Rican and black people.
Encourage you to pick a specialty?
No.
No? Okay, so how did they place you? Like, how did they know where to place you?
Well, when you first get into basic training, what they do, there's a series of tests you take, written tests. A lot of paperwork you have to do. So you take all these tests, and then they kind of evaluate you on that testing. You know, and then one thing too, they look at a person as far as height. They don't want somebody tall in the infantry, because they're the ones that are going to get shot first, you know. So, but then there's basically, if you had any skills that they could use, they would put you in those skills. Well, I didn't have any skills they could use, so I was either going to be like most people were, there's going into one of the 3 combat branches. One is the armor, which is the tanks. The other is artillery, which is the big guns, and the other is the infantry, which is the riflemen. So I didn't know. You don't know. Nobody knew where they were going to go until we got our orders after we graduated.
So that being able to use dynamite wasn't an advantage in the Army?
Well, I don't know if I even put that down, you know.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I didn't.
Because you could have been maybe with a special ops group or
Yeah,
something.
ordnance. But then, you know, like people who join the Army more or less had a choice. Like when you join the Army, you deal with a recruiter, and you tell the recruiter, look, if I join, I want to be in the military police, or I want to be a truck driver, or I want to be, they didn't have computers, and I want to be communications or something. So your chances were a whole lot better if you joined the Army to get one of those jobs you wanted. When you're drafted, you pretty much know you're going to be cannon fodder. So I used to joke that, heck, I couldn't even get a job with the mafia on the outside because they don't have a use for somebody that knows how to fire a 105 howitzer, you know. Like usually what they do, you get basic training, basic combat training is supposed to be 16 weeks. Your first 8 weeks is your basic combat training, and your second 8 weeks is your, what they call it, your advanced combat training. So I didn't have to go to advanced. I went into a regular outfit that guys had already been trained on this. You had, you know, all kinds of people in there, guys that knew what they were doing. So, and it was really, I got in was, when I saw my buddy Dennis Mack, he was put in another, there was artillery, there's A battery, B battery, C battery, and headquarters battery, 4 batteries. And I was in A battery, and Dennis was in, or we called him his last names, Mac was in the B battery. So I got in B battery, and it was really something because, they accepted us all pretty well, you know, because a lot of times, if you're harassed when you're new or something, they harass you, hey, recruit, and call you recruit for recruit, you know. So I'd always say, okay, lifer or something, you know, back to him. So it was a good bunch of guys, and I had a good sergeant named Sergeant Nichols. He was an Aborigine guy from Africa or from Australia, and his English wasn't that good, but he sure knew artillery, but he liked his wine. And he liked to call his group, call them the Thunderbird Squad, you know. So we'd all get together and drink some Thunderbird wine. So I get in with these guys, and a lot of African Americans and Puerto Ricanos there. So I really got to meet a lot of people of other races. We might have had 1 or 2 Mexicans, mostly Puerto Ricans. We had one Japanese guy, and mostly African American guys, and then a few sprinkling of white people, which I was one of. So I got along pretty well. I learned everything really well, and it's pretty simple. But evidently in the artillery, but you have to know your numbers. I mean, I scored pretty good on map reading and things like that. Stuff I learned in the Boy Scouts, and even prospecting, that learned how to use maps. So, because it's real crucial in artillery. You don't want to kill your own people or shoot something you're not supposed to shoot, So I learned that, and I was in Oklahoma then for probably a year and a few months, and then Vietnam was picking up. Whenever something happened, they'd say, "Yeah, you can better do this right, because next thing you know, you're going to be in Vietnam." But the whole experience, just being there in Lawton, Oklahoma, and Fort Sill, was really great, because that's a story in itself. I was enjoying it. My gun crew, when we'd go out on the East Post, and we'd have to pass by this old cemetery, and there was a big pyramid of rock there. That was Geronimo, where Geronimo was supposed to be buried. He died there at Fort Sill and was buried at the Fort Sill Cemetery, in Indian Cemetery. So whenever we'd go by, we'd salute Geronimo. Geronimiso, Geronimo, we'd go by, we'd salute him when we went by, we drove by. So I even one day when it was off, I came back. I got there in May. I came back in July, and I got my car. I didn't want to be stuck in the post all the time. So I came back and got my car. So I spent 4th of July weekend. I took a plane from Lawton to Tucson. I spent most of that weekend with my girlfriend. So I drove back on 4th of July, figuring I could make it in time by 6 o'clock in the morning on the 5th. Well, that afternoon, 4th of July, my car breaks down in Ruidoso, New Mexico. It wasn't out in the middle of, right near the little town of Ruidoso. So it turned out it was a freeze plug in the engine block. Well, I knew how to fix it, but I didn't have the tools. So it was on the Mescalero Apache reservation. So these Indian brothers come by and said if I needed any help, and I said, man, I'm in the Army, I'm going to be late, and I'm going to be AWOL. So they gave me a ride to Alamogordo, which was ways south of there, to find an auto parts store that was open where I could buy the part. So didn't know him with these 3 Indian guys, and so they took me down there and found a parts place that was open, and drove me back. And then they even were helping me. But then, they couldn't stay there forever. So as I was fixing it, they finally left, and to the point where it was getting dark. I said, damn, So I had to put the flashlight in my mouth to hold that while I was getting that. I had to knock the old, plug into the engine. Then I had to get it in just right. So finally I got it in. And I'd bought some antifreeze or coolant and all that stuff and filled it up and was on my way. Well, 6 o'clock in the morning comes. I'm still out there in western Oklahoma, so I'm AWOL. So, and I was so tired. There were a couple of times these flat roads, I went off the road. There wasn't many interstates at that time either. So finally I made it in at 10 o'clock. I was 4 hours late. Well, I got an Article 15, which was disciplinary action. So I got, in military terms, I got my ass chewed out. So I was going to have to do 2 weeks restriction to post, and then I was going to have to do special detail, not knowing what the special detail was going to be. So they put me, the special detail turned out to be I was going to work on what they called a condiment run. Going to condiment and food to the different mess halls around. We'd have to go to the freight cars or the warehouses and load all this food stuff up and then take it to the various mess halls on Fort Sill. So it was a piece of cake. There was a sergeant and a driver and me. So the driver and me and the sergeant helped, and we loaded stuff up and went around to all the mess halls, and we always timed it so that at noon we'd stop at either the MP's mess hall or the WAC's mess hall. WAC's was the women mess hall, where they always had good food, steak and all that stuff. So that was 3 days a week I had to do that. So I did it actually for quite a while. The other 2 days I did the artillery stuff. So I got to, so my mess sergeant, they knew I was pretty popular on KP, because at 5 o'clock they would, I'm not deviating, I'll come back to where I was, but 5 o'clock in the morning, the charge of quarters wakes you up, the people who have KP, and there's 6 people on KP, and we shared the mess hall with headquarters battery. So the 3 from headquarters and 3 from my battery. Well, so I always figure one way to get ahead thing I learned earlier in life, take the worst damn job there is, which was pots and pans. So after a while, I had a reputation of being the pots and pans guy, and we had to be there by 6 o'clock. So after, because people, they jump up and try to get dining room orderly or some kind of, work in the dishwashing machine for the trays and stuff. They'd get there, or outside man, which would be helping on deliveries, and then the pots and pans guy. So when they knew I was on pots and pans, everybody showed up at 5 minutes to 6, So pretty soon I endeared myself to my compañeros, So that worked out good, and I became friendly with all the cooks. I did a good job on that. So when I was on that ration breakdown, the cook asked me, the head cook, the mess sergeant, you ever can get a hold of any extra coffee? And we had these big, 3-pound cans of coffee came in. He said, I'd like to get some if you could get me some. I said, yeah, what else you need? So we had free run at the warehouse. And the sergeant never went, when he went in when we were unloading the truck and all, so he'd always go in and have coffee or something. So I'd pick up a couple of cases of coffee or whatever else he needed, and I'd drop it off to him. So whenever I'd go through a line, then the guy who was a cook became friendly with him, and he was kind of a racketeer kind of a guy. So I endeared myself to them, so I always got extra steak, extra ice cream, and I could go back and get more. You wouldn't give it on the line because you'd cause a riot when everybody saw that I was getting 2, but I'd go back. So and the cook I was telling you about him, he had a couple of businesses going on. He had money, and he was loaning money out, like 5 for 10, 10 for 20. And every payday, it was collection time. So I got hired as a collector to go and round up these guys who owed him money. And also he had a little landscaping business. So after our work on base, he'd take off and we'd go in and I'd cut grass and I'd get paid. He paid me for it. And then he would pay me some money when I collected money for him. So it worked out pretty good. So, but anyway, going back to when I got off on this tangent, I can't remember what it was, but it just had to do with the friends that I made. So guard duty was another thing. And in guard duty, you have to go, you had to learn general orders, code of conduct. You had to memorize all these things, 12 general orders. So when we had guard duty, usually a lieutenant would come and inspect you. You have to really nice clothes, your rifle in shape. You had to look sharp. So they'd come when the officer would come and inspect, and to be 4 of you. And one person would become a supernumerary, who would be the person who wouldn't have to stand guard duty. So I always tried to be supernumerary, and 9 out of 10 times I became supernumerary, because it was a thing with your rifle, when the officer comes to you, do the salute with the rifle. So then the officer starts asking you some questions, and I'd almost spit in their face answering their questions, You really got to be tough with them, Then they'd try to grab your rifle. So when I was so quick, we used to practice it. about releasing your rifle, because if they dropped your rifle, you were automatically supernumerary. So it was only one time I managed to have him drop the rifle, but other times he picked me to be the supernumerary of what I did to endear myself to my camaradas, that we had these different shifts, 2-hour shifts during the night. So I would take somebody's shift, usually the second shift. We'd have to start, say, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock in the morning. So I would take, say, the 7 to 9 shift. So to give somebody a break. So, and then if I felt up to it, I would do the 5 in the morning to 7 in the morning. I didn't have to do it, but just do it, you know. And then we had the whole day off the next day anyway. So one time I had guard duty, and it was raining like hell, man. And I had this poncho on, and I was sitting. You're supposed to wander in the motor pool. Supposed to be wandering all around. It's all fenced in, and we had no guard shack there. So I was sitting in a 2.5 truck, staying dry, and I see these headlights coming down the road. Oh, damn, man. So wouldn't you know it, so I just got everything ready. I got out of the truck, and it's pouring rain. You know, so I stopped right in front of the gate. So you have to do the halt, who goes there, and you have to do the password. So I did the halt. Who goes there? Field officer of the day. Advanced to be recognized. I said advanced 1 to be recognized. So meanwhile, he starts coming towards me, and the sergeant of the guard comes there, is coming there too. And I said, halt, God damn it. I said advanced 1. You know, so they kind of jumped, you know. So, you know, and there was enough light from the headlights of the vehicle that I could see where there were puddles of water out there. So the captain, he was a major. The major came, and we did the password, whatever the password was at that time. So then I advanced to be recognized. So I want to see some ID. And I had my rifle at ready. By then I saluted him, but then I had my rifle at ready. He gave me his ID. So then the sergeant says, "Can I advance forward?" And I noticed that when I halted the major, he stopped right in a puddle of water. And he didn't have like boots on his nice shoes. So then he asked me if he could move. He asked permission to move. So I said, okay. And the sergeant, meanwhile, I could see standing behind the major. He was not a happy camper. So I looked at his ID. I said, okay, what's your serial number, your service number? Blah, 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 blah. And I happened to notice on his ID card it said captain. I know this guy's a major, you know. So I said, so I saluted him and I said, congratulations on your appointment to captain. Oh, well, thank you. You're very observant. And I says, yeah. I said, we always get reamed about it if we don't. As soon as we're promoted, we're supposed to update our card. And my suggestion would be to you the first thing tomorrow morning. You go there and get it updated. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I completely forgot about it. So then he says, what's your second general order? And I said, well, you know, if you need help, you notify the next post next to you. I don't remember what it was. He says, well, that other post is quite a ways from you. How would you notify them? I see all these rocks around here. I'd throw rocks to get their attention. He says, you mean you can throw a rock that far? And I says, yeah. I said, you want to see me? Said, no, that's all right. So meanwhile, and he asked me a couple other questions. Then we saluted, and he said, good job, and he left. So when my shift was over, that the sergeant comes with the relief, and the sergeant was all pissed off at me. My God, he says, I'm a career man. This is going to ruin my career. And, you know, this is going to go on my record. You know, you were disrespectful and blah, blah this and blah, blah that. So I said, because he knew I was a draftee and was only going to do my 2 years, you know. So I'd water under the bridge, so nothing happened. So a couple of days later, I was on KP, and I hear that somebody said the first sergeant was there at 1 o'clock. When you're on KP, you don't have to go through all that stuff. is Private First Class Miles here, or Private Miles? And they said, no, he's on KP. Okay. So then I waited until then somebody told me he was asking about it, because usually I was in some kind of trouble, you know, when the first sergeant called me there. So the next day he did, and he kind of, I knew he was doing it to embarrass me. He said, I want to see you in my office right after formation. And then he says, and Private Miles, this is in regards to a letter of commendation. You got letter of commendation? So I went there afterwards. So he read it. He read it to the people there, you know. And it was just talking about like this honor about or on the day of such and such. And the major explained what happened, that Private Miles was on guard duty, and you know, there had just been something happened in Vietnam where some people, they were lax on guard duty, and a bunch of Americans were killed. So he used that example of Miles was on guard duty in Vietnam, that never would have happened, and you know, he went above and beyond the call of duty and blah 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 and all this stuff, you know. So here I had this commendation, you know. So, holy smoke. So I thought, well, I'm going to get that sergeant of the guard, who happened to be the sergeant. He was the head of maintenance of the vehicles, you know. So I went to the office afterwards, and this first sergeant said, you know, this'll go good on your record if you want to make a career in the Army. You know, not everybody gets these citations and blah blah blah. So, and I told him, first sergeant, I really don't care. Well, the trouble you've been in, the Article 15s you've gotten, then that's where I think I lost my train of thought before that. He said, this'll all neutralize all of that. So I was, well, okay, whatever, you know. So then what it is, Article 15s, when you get in trouble, then you have to go before the first sergeant and your battery commander, usually a captain. And they discipline you, you know. I think I'd got a speeding ticket one time, and I'd gotten into a fight downtown at a bar, you know, and stuff that got reported, you know. So I got Article 15s, or I wasn't reduced in rank or anything like that. I just got restricted to barracks or something, you know, for a couple of weeks. So that was that. So anyway, you know, I was a pretty popular guy in my outfit anyway. So what had happened, I had leadership skills in the fields, and we were out in the field on these you know, maneuvers and what have you. I mean, I had everybody organized. So we had a new battery commander. So right away they knew, I mean, people were looking up to me rather than some of these sergeants. At that time, I think I had a different sergeant. So they wanted to give me an office job. Because you're going to be a training NCO. I said, NCO? I'm a private first class. Well, you know, it'll get you out of the field and blah, blah this and blah, blah that. So I said, if you don't want it, I'm going to force you to take it. So I took it. So what I was going to have to do was going to have to draw up a training program for an officer's training, because they had the officer's candidate school there. Me, I don't know how to do this stuff. So I'd have to call people. This is Private First Class Miles calling, you know, they Sergeant so-and-so and private, you know, what the hell, you know. So I had a hard time getting cooperation. So, you know, I would have to type a stencil because everything would be mimeographed off. God, it was forever. I didn't know where all the keys were, you know. So I figured that's it, you know. I think I got my first weekly schedule out, and then I had to go see the captain. So that's it, you know. I mean, I can't do this job. I'm not capable of doing this job. You're going to have to get somebody else. And I got the company clerk who was gracious enough to help me do this stuff, show me how to do it. I didn't know how to do it. Now I know how to do it, and I can't do it. I mean, it would drive me crazy. I'd rather be out in the field in the mud than do that. So he put me back out in the field. So everybody was happy to see me back there, especially the mess crew, because I would volunteer when we'd go out in the field to put up the mess tent, this great big tent. Then after a while, you know how to do it. You work with people, the kitchen people and the KP people. And so I was real good at putting this big-ass tent up, you know, getting it up. So we could do it in a matter of a couple of hours. Big tent, you know. So I did that. So that endeared myself to the cooks even more. So then I had to leave. I had a 2-week leave, so I left and came back to Tucson, and then I wasn't going to take my car back. So I was just going to go without the car, because meanwhile there was a bus line, and I had a girlfriend down there in Lawton, Oklahoma too, and I kind of, this would be an excuse not to be hanging around at the bars downtown, you know. So I flew back, and when I got back, I walked in the barracks. I said, what the hell is going on here, you know? And what had happened, this was a buildup for Vietnam. So they had taken a lot of guys from our outfit and sent them to the 1st Air Cav, who was going to go to Pleiku, Vietnam. And then with us, I didn't know what was going to happen. Us and a lot of my good buddies were gone, you know. And in that 2-week period, I was gone. It was all turmoil, and we were preparing all our equipment, all our guns, everything, these big 105 howitzers, 105 millimeter howitzers, put Cosmoline on and wrapping them up because they were going to be shipped by ship overseas to Vietnam. God, you know, so that meant we were going to go, and they were going to be putting a whole bunch of new people in. You know, so they took experienced guys from us to probably go in with another bunch of inexperienced guys, then bring in inexperienced guys with us because we were experienced. So I don't know how long that took. It took probably a month or so, and then they got us on a troop train there in Lawton, Oklahoma, and loaded us all on the train. All our gear had been put on these trucks. We had 2.5 trucks, you know, 2.5 ton trucks, 3/4 ton trucks, Jeeps, you know, all our artillery, all our weapons except our own personal rifles, everything was packed up and should be shipped, and it had to be picked up to be protected from salt water, any corrosion from any salt water going overseas. And we had that, so everything got packed up, and they put us on a troop carrier, and we went to Oklahoma City, then went all the way across Oklahoma City through Albuquerque, Flagstaff, you know, Needles, California, and then up to Oakland, California. And we got there. It was like in the middle of the night, and it's raining. You know, and it was cold, and we had like 2 duffel bags. You know, so plus your rifle. Your rifle was with you all the time. No ammo. You had a rifle with an empty clip because you had to keep your rifle clean all the time. So then we had and from there they put us on these trucks and trucks and buses and took us down to the port at Oakland. There was a big ship, great big ship. It was the General J.C. Breckinridge. It was basically a troop ship. So, and evidently, you know, our gear, all our trucks and gear, everything had gone on before us. And it was already loaded on board the ship. Because we did whatever we do back there, killed time back there in Fort Sill until we hit the ship. And then we got on the ship. But my friend Dennis Mack, he had written a letter to me. He was already in Vietnam, and he said, you know, take these little containers of whiskey. You can sell them, you know, on board ship. You know, you buy them for $2 or $3. You sell them for 10. So I loaded up with a bunch of pints and half pints of this whiskey stuff. We're going to make some money, you know. And I didn't drink really. I drank beer, but I wasn't a drinker. So he gave me that tip. So, so the Marines all were in the front part of the ship, and we were in the back. And there were four compartments, and there's 7 compartments going lengthwise and 4 compartments high. So we were 1, 2, 3, 4 was the bottom, 7 was where the rudder was, and wouldn't you know it, that's where we were. And they had these bunks that were hanging I don't know, they was like not on the floor, they were hanging from the ceiling or whatever they call the ceiling in the ship. So, and they were like, you had about this much space between bunks, and there were like about 4 of these bunks. So I got, being I was taller, I figured, well, they put me up on one of the top bunks. And so, and it was noisy because you're back there when the ship, so well, we got situated in there. So then the ship was going to leave that afternoon. So heck, we all got on board and went through the Oakland Bridge and underneath the Golden Gate Bridge and saw Alcatraz, went by Alcatraz Island and went out into the Pacific Ocean. Saw the sunset on the Pacific Ocean. So then they had mess halls, or galleys, I guess they call them in the Navy. So I went down there to eat and went going to bed, and it was hotter than hell. Eeh. So where I was, they had this ductwork where carried like cooler to different parts of the area of where we were sleeping. So right above me, you could see somebody had cut out a piece of ductwork. So I figured, hell, so I got some skills there. As I took it apart and got that nice cool air. But somebody down the line was going to suffer, you know. So I had a cool, you know, I was pretty inventive at things like that. So then we had, you know, we were out there on the ship, and there wasn't anything to do during the day. At nighttime, they showed movies, but we'd have to do, you go up on one of these decks and you do all your calisthenics and workout and stuff like that. And then it would seem like every other day I had KP in the galley. And so, and you had regular sailors where the cooks and people that are running things there, and they were easy to get along with. They were good guys. So so in KP it was an all-day job, and it was interesting because you didn't have to sweep the floor or mop the floor. They just pumped in some water and they flooded the floor, and then when the ship turned, they opened up these little kind of like sewer pipes, and all the water went out into the ocean, and the floor was dry, you know, you'd close it off. And so KP wasn't a chore. So I think it was every third day. So the next day you had the day off. So go up on deck, and the ocean was just amazing. I'd never been on the ocean before. And just going out there, you know, were the fish, you know, that would jump out of the water, and just cruising across the ocean. And one of the jobs on KP was elevator operator. So because you had KP, and when you had like your trash and stuff or leftover food, they would be loaded up in these containers, and you'd run the elevator up to the top deck where they could take it out to the back of the ship. They call it the fantail, and then dump all this food scraps. And here you had all these fish jumping out of the water, eating all this food. So when I was elevator man, I'd be back there trying to see if I could identify what kind of fish are out there, you know. So it's hard to say. There were flying fish. There were all kinds of fish. Just amazing. And some pretty good sized fish were coming up. Never saw any whales or anything like that. And so we got further out into the ocean, and one day went out. It was pretty smooth sailing, and I couldn't believe my eyes. I went out there, and it was like a plane of glass, like a mirror out there. Not a ripple, not a thing on it. I mean, my God, I hadn't seen it. It was literally like a mirror or a plane of glass as far as you could see. I was just, wow, you know, incredible, you know. So all the other times there's always a little action in the ocean. At nighttime, the stars, when there was no moon, and the stars was just amazing. You had like from one end of the where you can see on the ocean, and supposedly you can see like 13 miles out there, you know, to the other end, nothing but stars, man, just amazing. Then on the other hand, one day it was still at nighttime. We're sleeping there, and the ship is just, oh, another thing, when the ship, all of a sudden it stopped running. It broke down in the middle of the ocean. What the hell is going on here? What happened that they had a converter. They converted salt water to fresh water. They used that to to cool the engines that ran the ship. And they couldn't use salt water because of its corrosive effect. So that desalinizer, whatever it's called, couldn't operate, so they had to fix it. And they had onboard ship, they had machine shops, they could fix anything. So we floated around out there for about 3 days. And finally, we took off again. And then one morning I woke up and man, things were pretty rough. So I had KP that day. So when KP was up, above the water line, because where we were, the lower deck, we were underwater, in the ship. So there was things were knocking around, and it just happened to be that I was elevator operator that day. And man, because they had freezer no, I was elevator operator the following day. They think, when we had the storm. But I remember looking out the portholes and seeing the windows and seeing nothing but mountains of water, huge. I mean, you're down there and there's a huge mountain. God, and all of a sudden you're seeing nothing but daylight, as the ship is going up and down, and they were swells, big, huge swells. And man, that scared the hell out of me. I thought, man, this ship is going to go down, man. We're going to drown out here, It was frightening. The water was just like a dark green color. It's just amazing. So as it turned out, we were on the fringes of a typhoon, because this was like September, October, and later in the season. So the next day I was fortunate enough to be elevator operator, but they had a freezer compartment. Everything that was in the compartments really wasn't secured for the rough water, so stuff had broken, and the freezer shut down, and there was ice cream they had, these big containers of ice cream, so it was all starting to melt, so all that stuff had to be thrown out. So we pigged out on ice cream going up, and then it was pretty. They couldn't. That's right. They couldn't do anything the day of when the ocean was so rough, because it was too dangerous to be on deck. You'd be swept overboard, So this was a cleanup the following day, and it was still kind of rough, but not that rough. Some of the guys that had to take the garbage to the end, they had like these safety lines. They had this harness on. They had a safety line to dump this stuff, so they wouldn't go overboard. The Navy had all the answers. So then it was another thing, a strange thing. They don't really have latrines in the Navy, so if you got to go in there and you got to take a dump, they got this thing. It's like a big stainless steel trough with water in it. Then they got these things with all the seats on it, so you're in there. It's like a public latrine. You're in there, you're taking a dump, and you can see the stuff floating around it. Toss it out into the ocean. So they had a thing with constipation. It came out because some guys just couldn't deal with going to the bathroom with all kinds of people around trying to go to the bathroom too. And I had constipation for a little while, but that didn't become a problem. But then other guys did, because even to where the captain, when we're up doing our workouts up on deck, would want to know who hasn't had a bowel movement within 5 days, see us afterwards here, and I guess they were giving them laxatives or something. So, because it's a whole different situation, So then we got through that all right. Of course, we didn't have that much ice cream anymore, and so finally we got to Okinawa, because they had to drop off the Marines in Okinawa. So we had, I think we had 36 hours in Okinawa.
Knowing Jon for most of my life, I was surprised to learn that he was gung-ho for fighting in Vietnam. But I also sensed he was nervous about the prospects of going to war. In the next episode, we learn what it was like for him to get shot at for the first time by an enemy intent on killing him.